You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
Have you ever been forced to go to any type of training you didn't want to go to?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Like what?
Like the money laundering training.
Oh,
that one is, it's so annoying because it's so obvious.
right. Where they tell you, look for these red
If
flags.
somebody brings a suitcase of $1 million in
and then wants to redeem it the next day,
you should ask questions. Like, yeah, that one's usually no. What about you?
I had just started work for a company, and unbeknownst to me, right before I started working there, the top guy had gotten fired for sexual harassment.
Oh, nice.
The sexual harassment of kind of the worst kind, right?
Yeah.
And he was, trading leads for favors and to his salespeople, and to particularly the pretty women,
Of course.
And so the let's say the not so pretty women ratted the whole program out.
Of course.
And and so they weren't getting any leads, and so consequently, I hire onto this. I don't know any of this background, and everybody has to go through sexual harassment training. Like 2 solid days of sexual harassment training.
Maybe.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, wait, what did I do? Like, why are we having to go? And it was just a beatdown. It was just the worst. We were just all in this room, and the culture of this company I'd hired onto was not the best. And so they were, let's say, not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
It was an understatement. So
that seems like the reaction you'd get out of a company that perpetuated it.
Yeah, that's how that went.
Well, as far as suffering through trainings, we're not going to do a training today, but we're maybe going to talk about how to make trainings better in the future.
All right.
Okay. Dr. Erec Smith is a research fellow at the Cato Institute and associate professor of rhetoric at York College of Pennsylvania. His primary work focuses on the rhetoric of the anti-racist activism. He is one of the co-founders of Free Black Thought, an organization that promotes the diversity of viewpoints within the Black community in the United States. We had a great conversation with Dr. Erec Smith. I think as a business owner, you'll be interested in learning how to navigate the current landscape of DEI, regardless of your current position on the validity or the invalidity of the movement as it currently stands. So stick around, listen to Dr. Smith and his wisdom. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. Dr. Erec Smith, I get accused of being a heavy talker a lot, but I never took it so far as to become a professor of rhetoric.
Rhetoricians are light talkers. They're not heavy talkers at all. They make the heavy seem light. That's the whole point.
And that's the difference between me and you.
He even turned that on you. He flipped that on its head and threw that right back in your face.
Yeah, there you go.
So not only is he out dressing us today in his suit, he's out talking us already.
Yeah. Just when in doubt, I dress up. I mean, if I would have known, I would have had jeans and a t-shirt on right now.
Yeah.
You didn't know it was a Smith family reunion, did you?
Smith brothers here. Yeah. Yeah. So Eric, you had done some DEI training and then decided to stop doing that, and actually were vocal about what you thought some of the failings of that were. And I wanted to kind of find out what precipitated that.
Well, a couple of things. First, I realized quickly that the administration at the school at which I did this was not on the same page with me regarding what diversity really meant. I was having a conversation with the university's president one day, and I said, Black people as a group are very diverse in themselves. We have different religions, different socioeconomic statuses, different values and beliefs and things like that, tastes, hopes, dreams. He looked at me like I was nuts, like I was crazy. Like, and I was like, oh boy, what did I get myself into? So it was quickly realized that I was there because, well, somebody needed to be there doing this stuff so they could say, hey, somebody's here doing this stuff, right? They didn't really understand what diversity meant, what it should mean, whatever. The second reason was that, it was an issue of diminishing returns. After a while, you just find yourself preaching to the choir, right? And because I don't believe in compelling people to do things, and because I didn't really have much power to compel people to do things, I was an assistant professor, no tenure. So there were no consequences to not listening to me, right?
Well, I know how that is.
Yeah. So the administration wasn't on the same page with me. And B, I found myself preaching to the choir over and over again, and nothing was really getting done. It was a useless position, a useless and powerless position. So I decided this was a waste of my time. There's more to me than this, and I never wanted to do it again.
So you mentioned diminishing returns. Were you finding that the data in the objectives were not bearing out? We're not getting the results?
Well, what I wanted to do was just inform people about diversity, the concept of diversity, the fact that not everybody has the same lifestyle or same experiences, and to be able to talk about that openly. That was my goal, and that is very different from contemporary diversity, equity, and inclusion officers who are trying to do a lot more, from thought policing to, basically scaring people into silence because they're afraid of microaggressions, right? And accidentally assaulting people and things like that. I honestly just wanted to create awareness.
What would you hope would be the point of creating that awareness of the differences?
Just kind of self-awareness on people's parts. When they see somebody and think something, they stop and say, okay, why do I think this? Where did I get this idea from? Is it an accurate idea? Can I talk to this person and get an idea from that as opposed to just projecting something onto this person, right? So it was really just about acknowledging other people as human beings and not abstract categories, and to kind of promote the idea of communication, effective communication, constructive communication across differences.
And did you feel like there were different objectives at play?
I don't think there are any real objectives at play other than, we need this guy to be here so that we can cover all our bases if something happens. If something, problematic regarding race or ethnicity happens, we can say, hey, we have somebody doing this. We're trying, at least. I think that was the main point of my hiring in that particular position. And so there wasn't, as far as I knew, there wasn't much ideological pushback. There were people who didn't like the fact that I was doing this because I was a relative newcomer, and they had been trying to do this work for quite some time. So there is that resentment there. But there wasn't resentment as far as, we don't believe in what you're doing. People didn't really think about it. They just said, okay, we have a diversity guy. Great, done. Check. We can move on.
It seems like broadly the DEI movement is, if I were to paint it in the most charitable light, they would say, well, what we want to make sure that spaces, organizations, subcultures of our nation that have been dominated by white people, either through chance or through outright, oppression throughout the course of history, that we don't maintain that simply by the inertia that exists within that movement, right? So if there's an industry that's become mostly white because we used to only hire white people, it could stay that way unintentionally, just because we're more likely to hire people and associate with people who look like us. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and we want to purposefully go outside the bounds of what might be our gut instinct or our natural reaction. And that sounds fine. That sounds normal. That sounds like a laudable objective.
Yeah.
And what I hear from you is that was maybe more limited. Am I articulating it correctly? More limited in scope and reducing people to a skin color instead of the, breadth of their humanity. And is that fair?
Well, I think nowadays, DEI is a different creature than it was when I was doing this work. I was doing it in the mid-aughts. Things were a little different back then. Again, I was trying to promote awareness. And by awareness, I include, making sure that being aware that minorities have the same access to resources as anybody else. So, if there is a hiring campaign that a company is doing, that company makes sure that, the information, the news gets to as many different people as possible. So the outreach is better, right? So you're targeting minority, groups, right? You're not just putting it out there and hoping for the best. You're making sure everybody sees that, so that you can diversify your workforce organically, right? No quotas or anything like that. You just make sure that everybody has an opportunity to submit that application.
So how did that go when you began to speak out against what you saw happening in that field of study or those programs? How did the backlash come back against you?
Well, I should say I started to speak out against it because nowadays, and by nowadays I mean the last 8 to 10 years, DEI is something different. DEI is now something undergirded by what's called critical social justice. And DEI undergirded by critical social justice is something quite different than what I was doing. It's very illiberal. It's very us versus them. It's inherently divisive. And frankly, it's racist. If we take racism to be making judgments about people based on their skin color, right? It's inherently that. In fact, contemporary DEI cannot exist without a form of racism, right? Without essentializing whole groups of people, without prescribing behaviors onto those whole groups of people. That's what I was speaking.
Well, what is it?
Yes.
What does it mean to essentialize groups of people?
Well, that means that you're prescribing behaviors onto them. Okay, so you're Black, so you're supposed to like this music, you're supposed to like these sports, you're supposed to hate this, hate that. You're supposed to speak a certain way. And if you don't follow all those things, then you're kind of breaking the rules, right? I published something recently, Boston Globe, about this. It's called Prescriptive Racism. Kind of basically punishing people for not abiding by the script you've given them as a particular person of a particular group, right? So,
Okay.
Yes. So I've gotten this a lot in my life because I have a command of standard English, and, and some people.
You better as a professor of rhetoric.
Yeah,
that better be your thing, right?
Yeah, right. And white and Black people, have given me crap about that. But that's basically what it is. And critical social justice cannot abide without this prescriptive racism. What prompted me to speak out was hearing a keynote address at a conference, an academic conference, in which the person giving the talk was arguing that it was inherently racist to expect Black students to write in standard English, right? Because as Black students, they should be writing in Black English. That's essentialist. That's prescriptive racism. You're supposed to be doing this, and expecting those students to speak in a dialect that isn't their home dialect, quote unquote, right, is inherently oppressive. I spoke out against that, basically saying, is this really a good idea? this skill might come in handy one day, the writing of standard English. And the backlash to that is what pretty much changed the trajectory of my career, right? I had other interests before that day. I had very different interests after that day. My interest after that day was to push back against this stuff until it goes away.
Yeah, I would think that when you look at trying to help someone advance in a dominant culture, that you'd want to help them become proficient in the communication style and language of that culture.
Yes.
And not be divisive and say, let's isolate those. So, if an immigrant comes over from, Poland, they better learn the vernacular and the ways to communicate effectively in the culture they're trying to succeed in.
Well, let me say this. The primary goal of critical social justice is to topple what is considered a quote unquote white supremacist culture, right? You may say you're here for racial justice, but it's really about transforming society. You can use race or sex or gender kind of as a tool, a battering ram, if you will, for accomplishing that goal. So if you give minority students the skill of standard English, of writing standard English, then what do? You set them up to go out into the world and better ensure, not completely ensure, but better ensure that they have happy and successful and fulfilling lives because they have the proper skills to achieve those goals. If they do that, they're maintaining the status quo, right? Mm-hmm. And if they're maintaining the status quo, they're not transforming society. So if you are somebody who abides by critical social justice and you want to transform society, the last thing you want to do is make people comfortable in that society. You want to make them uncomfortable. You want to make them, look around and say, I'm not prepared for this world. Something needs to change, right?
So divisiveness is sort of the objective, then, you might say.
Right. It's not a mistake. It's not a bug. It's a feature.
And so what is their end goal with that division?
Societal transformation. A lot of critical social justice comes out of what some call cultural Marxism, neo-Marxism. Ideologically, it's attached to that. And what I mean by that is it takes on the same structures as economic Marxism. Marxism is about the bourgeois versus the proletariat, right? This is about white versus non-white. Same dynamics, same lack of trust in anything that has anything to do with the white or with the hegemonic power, right? The powers that be. The point is to break that down so you can break down hierarchies so you can implement a more egalitarian world, right? And that sounds nice on paper, but we all know how that's gone in history. Lenin tried to do that. Stalin tried to do that. Mao tried to do that. And it didn't go well for the people. Perhaps they were happy, but it didn't go too well for anybody else.
It seems like there's an effort to even stifle the discussions about that topic of moving towards more equality. So by changing definitions where we're not even talking about the same thing. Yeah. I remember that when I was growing up, the term racism meant a certain thing. Mm-hmm. And now that term has changed, and we can't even agree on what our outcomes are, what racism means, or those terms seem to be shifting in a way. And you think that's intentional to create that confusion?
Definitely. Think about it. I'm a professor of rhetoric, so I'm a big fan of things like adjectives. You use words to modify other words, so you don't. If you really wanted to educate people on, your take on racism, you wouldn't use the same word, the word that they define in a particular way. Change that definition, not tell them, and then chastise them for not knowing it. You have an adjective. Okay, so neo-racism, I don't know, or or counter-hegemonic racism, or something like that, modern racism, I don't know. You add an adjective so that you're distinguishing this from the understanding 99.9% of the people have, right? If you don't do that, you are trying to confuse people, all right? I mean, that's the bottom line. You know how they're interpreting something. You interpret it kind of the opposite, and don't tell them. You're creating chaos there, and that's for a reason.
Where do you think this originates from? I mean, it's not coming from the girl yelling down the street with blue hair. I mean, she's perpetuating that.
Mm-hmm.
But where are the headwaters to this?
I think the headwaters can be traced back to the 60s, really. The 60s counterculture movement, but even that was influenced by a lot of scholars and theorists who were members of what's called the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was a cultural Marxist think tank originating in Germany, but its members had to flee Nazi Germany and come to America and set up shop here. And what they were basically saying is that you have to kind of change the culture if you want to change anything. That includes economic structures and things like that. So this group got together, looked around the 50s and 60s, realized that there wasn't going to be a communist revolution, because people were too happy, right? So one of their prominent figures, Herbert Marcuse, started writing things, a book called One Dimensional Man, essays called Repressive Tolerance, essays on liberation and things like that, where he argues that, we got to stop aiming at the trying to convince the middle-class white Americans to revolt. They're too happy. They're too satisfied.
Yeah.
This capitalism thing must be working for them. And
this American dream thing is compelling.
Yeah, right. We can't have that. Let's find the people who are still pissed off. The black people are still pissed off. Let's find them. They're the new proletariat. They're our new foot soldiers, right? Let's make this about race and sometimes sex and gender and things like that. And the movement for racial justice will now be the movement for a kind of implementation of cultural Marxism, right? And that's kind of where the seeds were planted in the 60s New Left counterculture. Now, these people, they go to college and then they become professors, then they teach other students who go to college and become professors and yada, yada, yada. And, you wake up one day and it's 2024 and this is happening. This has been a long time coming. A combination of the New Left 60s with a sincere desire to do something about race, right? Kind of came together and created this Frankenstein's monster of activism and ideology that pretty much is most manifestations of DEI initiatives today. Not all of them. Some people are trying to do it right, but the problematic versions are undergirded by critical social justice and, just race activism.
I think there's been some problematic versions that made the news. I saw, what company was it? I think it was Coca-Cola or something.
Yes.
That came out just like, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, whether it's wrong or not depends on who you talk to.
Well, that's true. Okay.
They were taking their lead from people like Robert DiAngelo and Tima Okun, whose work focuses on white supremacy and what that looks like and how that can, embed its way systemically through a culture, right? And the primary tenet of Robert DiAngelo and people who abide by critical social justice is this. The question isn't, did something racist happen? It's how did it manifest in this situation? Meaning that something racist is always already happening, especially when it's between a white person and a non-white person.
So there's a presumptive presence of it
Yes.
out of the gate.
According to Robin DiAngelo, somehow this conversation we're having is racist. Like somehow it's racist. We just haven't figured it out yet. Mainly because we haven't been trained properly in critical social justice, right? We haven't read the right books and things like that.
And so then let me sell you some training in books.
Yes. It's a $1 billion industry.
So what was, tell me more about what exactly Coca-Cola did. Because I only know the surface, that they were just catching some heat.
Yeah, so I don't have the slides in front of me, but they went from Robert DiAngelo to someone named Tima Oken, who says that white supremacy is defined by several principles: perfectionism, paternalism, a false hope in objectivity, too much individuality, right? Either or thinking. Now, these are things that are not inherently white if you have any common sense whatsoever, but they're being called white. They're being called things that are most indicative of a white supremacist culture. Which is why the final slide of that Coca-Cola presentation said simply, try to be less white. That was the final slide of the presentation. Mic drop after that one. All right.
Yeah.
So somebody leaked it, and rightly so, Coca-Cola got in trouble.
Trying to be less white. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's so easy to play the tired game of, well, if you reverse the races, this is so, this would never fly. Everyone notices that, including the proponents of DEI. So like harping on the, if we reverse the races, I don't think helps fight the issue. I'm interested in understanding why white people choose to dive headfirst into promoting this ideology, because in the framework that you're explaining it, this is no longer economic Marxism, it's cultural Marxism. Instead of the proletariat attacking the bourgeois, it's non-white people battling white people. Well, why are some white people so eager to say, hey, I'm with you on the fight?
There are several reasons for that. One is there's people out there who sincerely want to do the right thing and are deferring to the people who they think are professionals or experts in this, right? And doing their best to just sit back and learn, to listen, right? I mean, and that's a noble endeavor. But, when they hear some nonsensical things, like intention never matters, or that certain innocuous terms are microaggressions, or that by being white, they are inherently racist and there's nothing they can do about it. Although they may want to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on with that? They may stay silent because perhaps they're just missing something, right? When I talk about this stuff and I show my students video footage of, woke protests and things like that, quote unquote woke protests, and they always react as if they're missing something. And the only people who react like, wow, that's really stupid, are the non-white students, right? They're the ones who are okay with saying that's a really dumb idea. The white students are not, no, I can't say that, right? Because then I'll be looked at as a racist. So there's that kind of pressure to go along with it. Secondly, they might be in on it. Remember what I talked to you about with transforming society, and how this is really, this DEI initiatives and things like that are really kind of a Trojan horse for a critical social justice ideology bent on transforming society and getting rid of hierarchies and capitalism at large, right? So they may very well be in on this. They may know that it's, it makes no sense, but the point is it's working and people aren't pushing back and they can gain some power from this. So there are a couple of reasons why a white person would be, quote unquote, okay with this ideology.
Did that happen in other culture or in other communist revolutions? Were there members of the bourgeoisie that said, oh, wait, hold on, let me try to realign myself with the side that is ultimately going to win, I think?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, I don't know specifics or anything like that, but you get statements like this in Lenin's Russia and Stalin's Russia, definitely in Mao's China, for sure. You get the people who are like, and I forget who wrote this, but there is a story about the grocer with the sign in his window saying that he promotes communism. He doesn't really, but he knows he has to put that in there to get by. You know, and that phenomenon, obviously it wasn't just one person. It was several people doing that. Just, okay.
Yeah, that's like Black Lives Matter yard signs in Portland.
Right.
I went to Portland a couple years ago, and I was like, man, I've never seen fewer Black people in a city in my life. Growing up in Fort Worth, like,
yeah,
I mean, it's a very diverse city. White people are not the majority in Fort Worth, and I go to Portland, and I was talking to a woman who had just moved there. I said, what do you like about it? She had moved from Texas. She goes, it's just so much more diverse. I said, you can't be serious. You can't be serious. And so I look up the stats. I was like, it's 80% white and voted, 75% for Joe Biden. I go, Fort Worth, we got a third Black, a third white, a third, Hispanic. And we voted like 51% for Trump or something. Yeah. I go, I'll take Fort Worth.
Yeah, it's with the signs, especially the Black Lives Matter signs and things like that. I mean, there are people who don't really understand what the organization is doing, right? They don't really understand what the organization is about. It's about the statement that Black Lives Matter, right? Or it's just I'm going to put this in my yard so that people know that I'm not racist. And just leave it at that.
Window so they don't break the window.
Yeah, like the communist grocery store.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Virtue signaling is what it's often called.
So some people in other movements have said, okay, well, I want to just not get attacked by the mob, so I'm going to play along. Right. What do you think changes in this country? Because it seems like communist revolutions never long-term last. What do you think happens in the West with this movement?
That's a good question. I wish I had a clear answer to that. I know things are starting to change. MIT over the weekend decided to no longer require diversity statements in their applications, which is a huge deal. And the president of the university cited that compelled speech isn't free speech and diversity statements are compelled speech. Why? Because there's really one right answer. And if you don't get that, then you are weeded out. That one right answer is something that abides more critical social justice than, say, our typical understandings of race and racism, right? Something that would come out of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King would not be as readily accepted as something coming out of the quasi-communist critical social justice camp where everything's racist and it's white people against non-white people, right? Sadly, the latter ideology is the one being sought by diversity, equity, and inclusion officers or administrators abiding by critical social justice. So MIT is, I believe, they're the first elite school anyway to no longer require diversity statements. And we'll see how that goes. I think things are changing.
What is a diversity statement? What do you mean?
A diversity statement is you have to have a page or a paragraph, whatever, stating your ideas about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What you believe about it, what you've done to promote it, what you plan on doing to promote it, right? And if you say something like, I'm going to treat people by the content of their character and not judge them by race, that doesn't fly. If you say, I'm going to acknowledge people's races and that they've had a very different experience from me, and as a white person, I am more privileged than they are, that's close, that's warm. You're getting warm there, right? When in actuality, that is essentialist. You don't know what somebody went through because of their skin color. You simply don't know that.
Right. So it would seem like as business owners, if I have some sort of diversity statement or better yet, a diversity program in place, that one of the benefits of me doing that as a business owner is I inoculate myself against any assertions of racism.
Right.
I can then point to this program and say, well, you can't stick this on me. I'm doing this.
Right.
So in that environment, how do I get out of having to do this sort of performative activism and yet do the right thing and creating a good environment where everybody has a fair chance and the rules are, fair?
The issue with that is that a lot of companies just said, like you said, okay, we need something in place here. So that it kind of protects us legally if something happens or something like that. The problem is they just went out and got anybody, right? And to do it. And sometimes that anybody was the kind of person who would use a slide that says, try to be less white, and nobody really vetted, the people coming in who are doing this work, right? So you have, people who abide by critical social justice, who abide by a Black Lives Matter organizational way of doing things, and it's causing more harm than good, right? Because they didn't really look into it. They just knew they needed something. So, I mean, if you want to have something in place, that's great, but realize that it doesn't have to be a particular kind of DEI. It doesn't have to be this critical social justice DEI. It can be, the original definition of affirmative action, which was this: do not discriminate based on skin color and make sure that everyone has access to the same resources regardless of skin color. That's it. That was the original definition of affirmative action. No quotas or anything like that. Just make sure everybody gets a fair shake and that nobody is treated badly based solely on immutable characteristics like skin color, right? Basically, and I say this all the time, like classical liberalism, the American way is social justice if you do it right. We're about equality and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and the inherent dignity of individuals and things like that. If we live up to those principles, then we are, promoting a more diverse and equitable and inclusive society. We need to just do that more. We don't need less America. We need more America in order to do this stuff.
If I want to get better at something in my business, it's very normal for me to track it and track my progress in that area. We want to improve our bottom line. Well, we need more clients. In order to get more clients, we're going to try to market. We're going to try out this new system so we can get digital leads. Well, I want to track and make sure that I'm actually getting the digital leads. So I'm going to track how many digital leads I'm getting. And if my numbers increase, then that means this new system is working. So if I want to change the culture of my company or my organization and say, well, we want to make sure that not only are we not discriminating, but we're going that extra step to make sure everyone has the same resources. And if we are improving in that area, we would expect to see an increase in non-white applicants and an increase in non-white hires.
Mm-hmm.
But now we get to a quota, and a quota, but following the logic that I laid out, makes a lot of sense because it's just some other key performance indicator within my company. But in practicality, a quota can be harmful. So why is a quota harmful? And are there other ways that we can track our performance in this area if it's something that a business owner wants to improve?
A quota is the result of people trying to do too much too quickly. You can diversify your workforce if you take the time to do it organically, if you have outreach programs, and this goes for not just the workplace, but also higher education. Having immersive programs where you go to the students of a particular racially homogenous minority community, and you meet them there. Right? Perhaps you bring them on the campus, immerse them in the culture so that when they do show up, there's not this culture shock, right? A lot of retention issues are based on the fact that people just aren't used to, what they're walking into. Get them acclimated to that. Give them access to the necessary merits, right? As early as possible. You can do the same thing with the workplace and college, outreach to HBCUs or something like that. Just saying hi, introduce yourself, creating a pipeline to your workforce. You can do it that way, but it's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take a few years, right? Before you start seeing noticeable diversification of your workforce. But if you want it to happen next week, you have to use a quota system. That's the only way to go about doing that. Too many people are trying to do too much too soon, because the pressure is to show the world that you have a diverse workforce. And if this person is using quotas and he has one, and you're trying to do it the right way, and you have yet to have a diversified workforce, then you look bad, right? So now everybody's got to do this quota game in order to maintain some kind of a racial ethos, right? The right way to do it is outreach and have an organic diversification of your workforce, but people are too impatient.
What are the practical things outside of outreach that a business owner can do who wants to improve diversity in their own organization without essentializing job candidates or current employees?
Well, I mean, if you do have people, if you do have a somewhat diverse workforce as it is right now, then you can just make sure that everybody who is currently working for you, does feel like they belong, does feel included. And that may take the form of one-on-one interviews, right? Consistently checking on the climate of the workplace, right? Consistently, not just one saying you don't do it again for another year, right?
How would you check on it? What do you mean?
Oh, well, there are various ways to do that. I mean, again, the one-on-one interviews, you can take, intermittent surveys here or there, right? You can have a place, something akin to an ombudsperson who can hear some issues or complaints. You don't need to have a diversity officer. You can do this in your, HR department without switching too much up. Just staying on top of things, right? And making sure that you understand the difference between an adaptive change and a technical change, right? For example, I use a example from these two men whose names I'm blanking on right now, who write for the Harvard Business Review. And they say, here's an example of a technical problem. You bring your car into a garage to get fixed. There's something wrong with the engine. The mechanic fixes it. Now you keep doing this. This car keeps showing up like every month, always banged up. And the technical solution is the mechanic keeps fixing it, right? The adaptive solution is the mechanic convinces the driver to stop drinking before he gets in the car, right? That's the adaptive solution. Okay, so problem solved there. There has to be some kind of emotional and psychological thing going on to really solve the problem. We can keep putting a Band-Aid on it with the technical, right? But ultimately, there's something else going on here. So you're not going to create diversity by following what's in page 2 of this rule book or whatever, right? You got to know your employees, which is easier to do in a small business than a large business. But you got to know your employees. You got to, talk to your employees. You got to, put your finger on the pulse of your workforce and keep it there consistently. And if there are certain issues, then based on the contingencies of your workforce, you decide what you can do about it.
So I'm a member of a nonprofit organization, and we were having a board meeting a while back talking about membership. And somebody brought up diversity. Well, we need more. And what they meant was racial diversity.
Yeah.
We need more Black members. And I looked around and I was like, okay, we aren't just a group that happens to be white people. It's a social group. Our members come from referrals from existing members. They don't come from billboards or Google ads or Facebook. They come from our circles, and most people probably have circles that look like them on not just a racial front, but for a lot of other things, right? Religion, socioeconomics, neighborhood, whatever. What side of the freeway do you live on? And I said, not only that, but I'm the youngest guy. Most of the people are older. I go, okay, so we're not just a white group or older group. Maybe they just don't want to be a part of us. Maybe it's not our fault. Maybe black people just don't like us. And I thought it was really self-important for us to think that we had something so special that all the black people in the city needed to be a part of it. Yes. They have things. They're not bored on a Saturday night. Like, they have stuff to do. And so I guess is it ever acceptable for an organization or a company, et cetera, to just say, you know what? I understand there's a good way that maybe there is, I can follow what Eric's saying, and I can improve in this area if I want, and I can do it in the right way. But is it acceptable to say, I'm not trying to improve?
Well, based on what you said earlier about the maybe they just don't want to be there, right? Like, I've been saying this for years. For years. There's a dean at the school which I teach, and one time he was giving a talk to a bunch of other professors about some kind of outreach or something, and he said, "Yeah, race is a problem. I mean, look around. There are no black people in this room." And I think to myself, maybe they don't want to be here. It's 7 p.m. on a Thursday. I mean, maybe they have other things to do, man. Like, you're not that. Is there somebody at the door keeping the black people out? No. It's everything has to boil down to racism. See, that's what the critical social justice thing is. The cause of everything is racism, right? There aren't black people there, must be racism. Can't be that they want to do other things. It can't be that, right? It's got to be racism. And yeah, that's part, again, that's not a bug, it's a feature of critical social justice. I like the idea of outreach, of making a concerted effort to get outside of your comfort zone, right? And reach out to people who you wouldn't otherwise reach out to. I think that is a good idea. I think quotas are a bad idea, meaning that if you're going to reach out, then you have to be okay with taking some time for this to grow organically. I'm not big on, well, we have to make sure that we're not keeping the black people out when you're not doing anything to keep the black people out. I don't like that at all. I think that's distracting, as a matter of fact. It keeps us looking at the wrong thing. We're looking in the wrong direction, right? If you want, what would attract different kind of things and see what kind of different people you attract, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be based on race.
I'm all for people going and putting themselves in a position where they are a minority. And I recognize, it's easier for some people to put themselves in a position of being a minority than others. And some people are in a position of being a minority almost every day, even though they don't want to be. But if you are a member of the majority group based on religion or race or whatever, it's a good exercise to say, hey, I'm going to go into an environment where I'm not the majority. And I remember I had some clients who recently moved states. Their church started to talk about all this like DEI stuff. Oh, we need more black people in our church. We need more black people in our church. And they were thinking, well, it's not that black people don't know Jesus. Black people love Jesus, okay? There's lots of black people who love Jesus in this country. It's not that they don't know about Jesus. They just might not want to be a part of our church, because why would they?
Yeah.
It's a bunch of white people. So they said, you know what? If we believe this message, we're going to go to a black church. And so they went and they found a church where they were the only white people. And they didn't go out and just pick the blackest church they could find. I mean, they just said, we're going to go to a church that's mostly black people, and they happen to be the only white people. And they're like, wow, this was a much better experience of integrating diversity into our lives than trying to bring someone into our group and make them fit in. And they were like, yeah, it was uncomfortable. We felt out of place. There were cultural norms and expectations that we had never learned and never been taught. And we kind of had to figure out which ones were acceptable for us to adopt and which weren't, and which ones we wanted to adopt. And yeah, I did that a few times in my life, kind of unintentionally found myself in an environment where I'm like, oh, wait a second, I'm the only white dude. And I can see the difference in that, like what that did to my life versus my friends who grew up in an environment where they never had that opportunity to do that, never sought that out. And I wish that was more of a part of the conversation.
Yeah. Like going to them instead of trying to bring them to you is basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, reaching out. I think that's an issue here. Trying to figure out, okay, doing the Robin DiAngelo thing and saying, okay, somehow I'm being racist. I just don't know how. I think that's not the way to go here. I think that's misguided. I think it's purposely misguided for reasons I talked about earlier. But I like the idea of outreach, whether you're a college doing it for high school and middle school students, whether you're a workplace doing it for college students, right? Creating that pipeline, going out and creating that, burgeoning relationship with people who, perhaps one day would be interested enough to apply for a job at your establishment because they know about you, because they met you when they were young, that fear of difference, that xenophobia that we all kind of have is assuaged substantially if you've been talking to somebody since you were 13, right? And these places do exist. There are programs that are doing this. There's Take Charge in Minnesota. There's the Hidden Genius project for specifically for STEM students who want to go to college to do something in the sciences and technology or whatever, right? These things are working. They're out there. They've been out there for a while. There's just not enough of them. I think we need to stop paying 800 DEI administrators, who are basically redundant and doing kind of the same job. Take that money and create outreach programs. They work.
Yeah, good advice. Final question for you, Eric. What would you say is your top decision-making tip for business owners?
Two things, really. One thing, really. There's something called empowerment theory. It comes out of psychology and social work. And it has three components. Intrapersonal or self-awareness empowerment, interactional or awareness of your environment, and behavioral, which can be construed as how do we get together and work as a team, right? A lot of things, whether it's a DEI initiative or just a workplace climate initiative, a lot of places skip the first step, the intrapersonal, and go straight to the how do we work together as a group. They skip the how do we understand ourselves? Why do I have these beliefs? Where do these beliefs come from? Why do I have these biases? Where do they come from? Who do I tend to project ideas onto? Why, right? So more like what's called metacognition, thinking about your own thinking, right? That way, when you do get into interacting with others, you're more aware that you may be projecting things onto them that you weren't aware of before, right? So now you're meeting people where they are. You're meeting people as they are and not as whatever projection you put on them, right? That prescriptive essentialism we were talking about a little bit earlier. So you're aware of yourself, you're aware of other people, and because of those two things, now you're able to work together better as a group, theoretically anyway, right?
Yeah, I think until we get to a level of self-awareness and recognize those things in ourselves, it's difficult for us to lead others and lead our teams because it'll be impossible for us to recognize it in someone else.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
Dr. Erec Smith, thanks for being here. Where can people connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Well, they can go to www.freeblackthought.com. It is it's a nonprofit. It's a journal. It's a podcast. The point of this organization is to basically say that Black Americans aren't a monolith. There are various viewpoints that are happening within the quote unquote Black community. And we're here to give a platform to those voices that you wouldn't hear in mainstream media, right? Like a Black guy who's against DEI. You're not going to get that on MSNBC. you're going to get it at Free Black Thought. And not just that, but, other viewpoints as well. It's about diversity of viewpoint within Black America. And if you watch mainstream media, you would think that we all think alike. And that is not the case whatsoever. So you can find, the work I and others are doing there. But you could also go to cato.org, type in my name and see all the things that I've been doing lately, whether it's a podcast or an interview or op-eds or things like that.
Thanks so much.
You are welcome.
Thanks a lot, Eric. My takeaway from talking with Eric is looking at having, not trying to take DEI training and those types of programs out of our businesses, but having them in our businesses, but making sure they are right, vetting what the content is before rolling it out to our employees.
My takeaway was about essentializing other people, and that it can kind of be easy to assume a lot of things about someone's views based on their race, religion, nationality, etc. And that's probably a constant battle that we ought to be aware of as leaders, whether it's leading our current team or hiring.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.